Hello and welcome again. This is your host Harshit Simha continuing the series with new topic on sustainable reporting. Today we'll discuss on climate, specific disclosure framework related to Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFC. This entire topic will elaborated into 6 parts in the coming 6 weeks, and in this week we will start with part 1. This introductory slide establishes the significance of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD, as one of the most transformative frameworks in modern financial governance and sustainability reporting. Introduced TCFD as a landmark initiative established by the Financial Stability Board in 2015 to improve the quality, consistency, and comparability of climate-related financial disclosures globally. Emphasize that the framework fundamentally changed how corporations, investors, regulators, banks, insurers, and capital markets evaluate climate-related financial risks and opportunities. Explain that prior to TCFD, climate disclosures were often fragmented, voluntary, non-standardized, and disconnected from mainstream financial reporting systems. Most sustainability reporting focused on environmental narratives rather than financially material climate risks capable of affecting asset valuations, business continuity, supply chains, insurance exposure, creditworthiness, and long-term profitability. TCFD bridged this gap by integrating climate considerations directly into corporate governance, strategic planning, enterprise risk management, and financial disclosures. Highlight that the framework was designed to support informed capital allocation decisions by ensuring investors and financial institutions receive decision-useful climate-related information. Mention that the framework became globally influential because it translated complex climate science into financial language understandable to markets and investors. Discuss the extraordinary global adoption of TCFD between 2017 and 2023, where thousands of organizations worldwide aligned with its recommendations. Emphasize that the framework's influence ultimately extended into regulatory systems, central banking policies, ESG investing practices, and international sustainability standards. Explain that TCFD later became the conceptual foundation for the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, climate disclosure standards, ensuring its long-term legacy within global corporate reporting architecture. Slide 2. TCFD has fulfilled its remit. This slide marks the formal conclusion of the TCFD's institutional mandate in October 2023. Explain that after 8 years of transformative work, the task force officially fulfilled its remit and disbanded following the release of its final status report. However, emphasize that this conclusion does not represent the disappearance of the framework. Rather, it signifies the successful integration of TCFD principles into mainstream global sustainability reporting systems. Discuss how the Financial Stability Board requested the IFRS Foundation to assume responsibility for monitoring climate-related financial disclosures through the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB. Explain that the ISSB's climate disclosure standards directly incorporate the structure, principles, and recommendations originally developed by the TCFD, ensuring continuity and long-term institutionalization. Highlight that this transition reflects the maturation of climate-related financial disclosure from a voluntary best practice framework into globally harmonized reporting standards. Mention that during its operational period, the TCFD successfully transformed climate risk from a peripheral sustainability issue into a core financial and strategic concern recognized by investors, central banks, regulators, and multinational corporations. Explain that the TCFD's success can be measured through several indicators: rapid growth in supporters worldwide, increasing disclosure rates across industries, widespread adoption by Fortune 500 corporations, integration into mandatory reporting regulations, and endorsement by organizations such as the G7, G20, NGFS, and financial regulators across multiple jurisdictions. Emphasize that the TCFD leaves behind a profound institutional legacy embedded within global capital markets, financial regulation, ESG investing frameworks, and corporate governance systems. Mention that the framework fundamentally altered how organizations measure, disclose, and manage climate-related financial risks and opportunities. The handover to ISSB therefore represents not an ending, but the evolution of TCFD into the next generation of global sustainability reporting architecture. Slide 3. Addressing the climate challenge. This slide introduces the fundamental financial market problem that motivated the creation of the TCFD framework. Explain that efficient financial markets depend upon accurate, reliable, timely, and decision-useful information. Investors, lenders, insurers, and regulators require such information to properly assess risk, value assets, allocate capital, and maintain financial stability. However, prior to TCFD, climate-related financial risks were inadequately disclosed, poorly measured, inconsistently reported, and often excluded from mainstream financial analysis. Explain that climate change creates both physical and transition risks capable of materially affecting companies, industries, infrastructure systems, and economies over long time horizons. Without standardized disclosure, financial markets struggle to correctly price these risks. Discuss how this information gap created the possibility of significant capital misallocation. Investors may continue financing carbon-intensive or climate-vulnerable assets without understanding long-term exposure to regulatory change, technological disruption, extreme weather events, sea level rise, or transition-related market shifts. Similarly, resilient and sustainable organizations may remain undervalued if climate-related opportunities are not properly disclosed. Emphasize that the TCFD recognized climate change not merely as an environmental issue, but as a systemic financial risk with implications for banks, insurers, pension funds, sovereign debt, supply chains, and global economic stability. Mention that this insight fundamentally changed the language of climate governance by reframing climate issues within the context of financial materiality. Highlight that the TCFD sought to address this challenge by establishing a globally consistent disclosure framework capable of improving market transparency and supporting more informed capital allocation decisions. Ultimately, the framework aimed to strengthen the resilience and stability of the global financial system in an increasingly climate-constrained world. Slide 4. Why the TCFD was created. This slide explains both the underlying problem and the institutional solution that led to the establishment of the TCFD. Begin by discussing how financial markets historically lacked sufficient climate-related financial information to accurately assess and price climate risks. Investors and lenders often relied on fragmented sustainability reports, inconsistent ESG disclosures, or qualitative environmental narratives that were not integrated into financial analysis. Explain that climate-related risks were increasingly recognized as potentially systemic threats capable of affecting long-term economic stability, asset values, insurance markets, credit markets, and business continuity. Financial institutions therefore required more consistent, reliable, and comparable climate information to support investment, lending, and underwriting decisions. Discuss the role of the Financial Stability Board, FSB, which recognized that climate-related risks could have implications for global financial stability. Under the leadership of Mark Carney and with support from G20 finance ministers and central bank governors, the FSB established the TCFD in 2015 to develop a market-driven climate disclosure framework. Emphasize that the TCFD was specifically designed to support investors, lenders, insurers, and other financial stakeholders by identifying the types of climate-related information organizations should disclose. Unlike broader sustainability frameworks, TCFD focused explicitly on financially material climate risks and opportunities relevant to capital markets. Highlight that the framework sought to create comparability and consistency across industries and jurisdictions. Explain that this was essential because climate-related financial exposure affects multiple sectors differently, including energy, manufacturing, transportation, banking, agriculture, real estate, and insurance. Conclude by emphasizing that the TCFD represented a strategic attempt to integrate climate considerations into mainstream financial reporting architecture rather than treating sustainability as a separate or isolated reporting exercise. Slide 5. Primary goal: market transparency. This slide focuses on the TCFD's central objective: enhancing market transparency regarding climate-related financial risks and opportunities. Explain that transparent markets depend on the availability of accurate and decision-useful information. Without such transparency, investors may misprice risk, resulting in inefficient capital allocation and financial instability. Discuss the first objective highlighted in the slide, risk integration. Explain that climate-related financial risks must become integrated into corporate governance, enterprise risk management, strategic planning, and investment decision-making processes. The TCFD sought to normalize climate risk as a mainstream business consideration comparable to credit risk, operational risk, or market risk. The second objective concerns better understanding. Explain that climate disclosure enables investors, lenders, regulators, and corporations to better understand the financial implications of climate change and the global transition toward a lower carbon economy. This includes physical risks such as floods, heat waves, and sea level rise, as well as transition risks arising from regulation, technological disruption, carbon pricing, and changing consumer preferences. The third objective relates to efficient allocation of capital. Explain that better information improves financial market efficiency by directing investments toward organizations that demonstrate resilience, adaptability, and credible climate transition strategies. Conversely, companies with unmanaged climate exposure become more visible to investors and financial institutions. Highlight that the TCFD framework was fundamentally designed to support long-term financial stability by improving the transparency and comparability of climate-related disclosures across sectors and jurisdictions. Mention that widespread adoption of the framework strengthened investor confidence and accelerated the mainstreaming of sustainable finance globally. Slide 6. Passionate Work, the 2017 Recommendations. This slide introduces the landmark 2017 TCFD recommendations, which became the foundational architecture of global climate-related financial disclosure. Explain that after extensive consultation and analysis, the TCFD released a structured framework centered on 4 core pillars: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. Discuss how these recommendations were specifically designed to help organizations disclose climate-related information in a manner that is financially relevant, comparable, and decision-useful for investors and financial institutions. Unlike many earlier sustainability frameworks, TCFD focused explicitly on financial materiality and integration into mainstream corporate reporting systems. Explain each pillar briefly. Governance focuses on board oversight and management accountability. Strategy examines how climate risks and opportunities affect business models, operations, and long-term planning. Risk management addresses how organizations identify, assess, and manage climate-related risks. Metrics and targets provide measurable performance indicators, emissions data, and climate-related objectives. Highlight that the recommendations are supported by 11 detailed disclosures that guide organizations on specific reporting expectations. Mention that the framework applies across both financial and non-financial sectors, ensuring broad relevance throughout the economy. Emphasize that the TCFD recommendations became highly influential because they created a common language connecting climate science with financial analysis. Investors, regulators, central banks, and multinational corporations increasingly adopted these principles to support transparency, resilience, and long-term sustainable value creation. Conclude by explaining that the 2017 recommendations ultimately became the conceptual foundation for global sustainability disclosure standards developed by the ISSB and other regulatory systems worldwide. Slide 7. The 4 pillars of TCFD. This slide provides a high-level overview of the 4 foundational pillars that define the TCFD framework. Explain that the framework is structured around governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets because these represent the essential elements through which organizations manage and disclose climate-related risks and opportunities. Discuss governance first. Explain that organizations are expected to disclose how boards and senior management oversee climate-related issues. Investors increasingly view climate governance as an indicator of institutional maturity and long-term resilience. Next, discuss strategy. Explain that climate change affects business models, operations, supply chains, financial planning, and competitive positioning. Organizations must therefore assess how climate-related risks and opportunities influence short, medium, and long-term strategic decisions. The third pillar is risk management. Explain that climate-related risks should be integrated into enterprise-wide risk management systems rather than treated as separate sustainability concerns. Investors want to understand how organizations identify, assess, prioritize, and mitigate climate exposure. The fourth pillar is metrics and targets. Explain that quantitative disclosure is essential for accountability and comparability. Organizations are expected to disclose greenhouse gas emissions, climate-related metrics, decarbonization targets, and progress against measurable objectives. Highlight that these four pillars collectively transformed climate disclosure from a qualitative sustainability narrative into a structured financial reporting system aligned with investor expectations and regulatory requirements. Slide 8. Governance. This slide focuses specifically on governance and board-level accountability for climate-related risks and opportunities. Explain that governance is considered foundational because effective climate oversight begins at the highest levels of organizational leadership. Discuss the role of boards of directors in supervising climate-related strategy, risk management, transition planning, and sustainability objectives. Investors increasingly expect boards to demonstrate active engagement with climate issues rather than delegating them entirely to sustainability departments. Explain that organizations are expected to disclose how frequently climate-related matters are reviewed, which committees are responsible, how expertise is developed, and how management reports climate issues to the board. Mention that climate governance increasingly influences executive remuneration, investment approval processes, and long-term strategic planning. Discuss management's role in assessing and managing climate-related risks. Explain that management teams are responsible for operational implementation, scenario analysis, emissions reduction initiatives, risk integration, and disclosure execution. Highlight that strong governance disclosure signals institutional preparedness and enhances investor confidence. Conversely, weak climate governance may indicate strategic vulnerability or inadequate organizational resilience. Conclude by emphasizing that TCFD governance recommendations encouraged climate considerations to become embedded within mainstream corporate leadership structures rather than isolated sustainability initiatives. Slide 9. Strategy. This slide examines how climate-related risks and opportunities affect organizational strategy and financial planning. Explain that climate change can influence operations, supply chains, markets, customer preferences, regulation, infrastructure, and investment priorities over multiple time horizons. Discuss the importance of identifying risks and opportunities across short, medium, and long-term horizons. Explain that some climate risks emerge gradually, while others may occur suddenly through policy shocks, technological disruption, or extreme weather events. The slide also introduces business impact analysis. Organizations are expected to explain how climate-related risks may affect revenues, costs, assets, liabilities, investments, and long-term business models. Highlight scenario analysis as one of TCFD's most transformative innovations. Explain that organizations must assess resilience under multiple future climate pathways, including 2 degrees Celsius or lower scenarios aligned with the Paris Agreement. This encourages long-term thinking and strategic stress testing. Discuss how scenario analysis helps organizations identify vulnerabilities, evaluate transition preparedness, and improve strategic adaptability. Mention that investors increasingly expect companies to demonstrate resilience under both transition and physical climate risk scenarios. Conclude by emphasizing that strategy disclosures help investors evaluate whether organizations are prepared for the economic realities of a rapidly changing climate landscape. Slide 10. Risk management. This slide addresses how organizations identify, assess, and manage climate-related risks within enterprise risk management systems. Explain that climate risks should be integrated into mainstream risk governance rather than treated as isolated environmental concerns. Discuss the importance of identifying both physical and transition risks. Physical risks include floods, hurricanes, heat waves, droughts, and sea level rise. Transition risks arise from regulation, carbon pricing, technological disruption, market changes, and reputational pressure. Explain that organizations are expected to disclose methodologies for assessing climate risk materiality, prioritization processes, mitigation strategies, and integration into enterprise-wide risk management frameworks. Highlight that investors increasingly view climate risk integration as an indicator of institutional resilience and management sophistication. Explain that climate-related risk management now influences lending decisions, insurance pricing, investment analysis, and corporate valuations. Conclude by emphasizing that TCFD transformed climate risk from a peripheral sustainability issue into a core element of financial risk management and strategic corporate governance. Slide 11. Metrics and Targets. This slide provides the quantitative dimension of the TCFD framework. Explain that investors require measurable indicators to assess organizational climate performance, emissions exposure, and transition preparedness. Discuss the importance of Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions disclosure. Scope 1 covers direct emissions from owned operations, Scope 2 covers indirect emissions from purchased energy, and Scope 3 includes emissions across the value chain. Explain that organizations are also expected to disclose climate-related targets, emissions reduction commitments, renewable energy adoption goals, transition metrics, and progress against performance benchmarks. Highlight that quantitative disclosure enhances transparency, accountability, and comparability across industries and jurisdictions. Mention that metrics increasingly influence ESG ratings, sustainable finance eligibility, and investor engagement. Conclude by emphasizing that measurable climate disclosure represents the foundation of credible climate governance and transition planning. Slide 12. 11 Recommended Disclosures. This slide expands upon the 4 pillars by introducing the 11 supporting disclosures that operationalize the TCFD framework. Explain that these disclosures provide greater specificity and comparability for investors and regulators. Discuss the governance disclosures relating to board oversight and management's role. The strategy disclosures address climate-related risks, opportunities, business impacts, and scenario resilience. Risk management disclosures examine identification, assessment, and integration processes. Metrics and targets disclosures focus on emissions, climate metrics, and targets. Highlight that these disclosures collectively provide a comprehensive view of how organizations govern, assess, manage, and measure climate-related risks and opportunities. Explain that the 11 disclosures became widely adopted because they balance flexibility with standardization, allowing organizations across sectors to disclose climate information consistently while accounting for industry-specific realities. Conclude by emphasizing that these disclosures form the operational backbone of modern climate-related financial reporting systems globally. Slide 13. Task Force Members. This slide introduces the composition of the TCFD task force itself. Explain that the Financial Stability Board intentionally assembled a highly diverse group of global experts representing financial institutions, corporations, advisory firms, insurers, pension funds, and credit rating agencies. Discuss the importance of including representatives from both financial and non-financial sectors. Financial institutions understand capital allocation and risk pricing, while corporations provide operational and strategic perspectives from the real economy. Explain that the task force's diversity strengthened the framework's credibility, practicality, and global relevance. Mention that the inclusion of accounting firms, consultants, and rating agencies ensured technical rigor and implementation feasibility. Highlight that this collaborative, market-led approach contributed significantly to the framework's widespread adoption and legitimacy among investors, regulators, and multinational corporations worldwide. Slide 14. Leadership and Expertise. This slide highlights the leadership of Michael R. Bloomberg and the expertise contributed by task force members. Explain that Bloomberg's financial market influence and global credibility played an important role in accelerating institutional support for climate-related financial disclosure. Discuss Bloomberg's background as founder of Bloomberg LP and his role as United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Ambition and Solutions. explained that his involvement signaled the growing importance of climate governance within mainstream finance. Highlight that the TCFD relied upon voluntary contributions from global experts across banking, insurance, asset management, accounting, consulting, and industry sectors. These individuals dedicated significant time and expertise to building a credible, practical, and globally accepted framework. Conclude by emphasizing that strong leadership and multidisciplinary expertise were essential factors behind TCFD's rapid institutional success and global influence. Slide 15. TCFD, a timeline of impact. This slide introduces the historical evolution and institutional journey of the TCFD between 2015 and 2023. Explain that over 8 years, the framework transformed from a voluntary disclosure initiative into the foundation of global climate-related financial reporting architecture. Discuss how the timeline reflects growing international recognition that climate change represents a material financial and systemic economic risk. Mention that the framework gained support from regulators, central banks, investors, corporations, and international organizations worldwide. Highlight key milestones including the publication of recommendations, increasing supporter numbers, development of implementation guidance, integration into regulatory systems, and eventual incorporation into ISSB standards. Explain that the timeline demonstrates how rapidly climate disclosure evolved from a niche sustainability issue into a mainstream financial governance priority influencing capital markets globally. Conclude by emphasizing that the TCFD's historical trajectory illustrates the institutionalization of climate-related financial disclosure within modern corporate reporting and global financial governance systems. Slide 16. April 2015 FSB considers climate. This slide marks the beginning of the institutional journey that ultimately led to the formation of the TCFD. Explain that in April 2015, the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors requested the Financial Stability Board, FSB, to examine how the financial system could better account for climate-related issues. This moment was historically significant because it represented one of the first major acknowledgements by global financial regulators that climate change could pose material risks to financial stability, asset valuation, banking systems, and long-term economic resilience. Discuss how the FSB recognized that financial markets lacked reliable, standardized, and comparable climate-related information. Investors, lenders, insurers, and regulators could not accurately assess climate exposure across industries because disclosures were fragmented, inconsistent, and often disconnected from financial reporting systems. This created the possibility of significant capital misallocation and underestimation of systemic climate risks. Explain that the FSB identified the urgent need for better climate-related disclosure to support informed investment decisions, insurance underwriting, credit analysis, and risk management. Climate change was increasingly understood not merely as an environmental issue but as a macroeconomic and financial risk with implications for global financial stability. Highlight that this period also coincided with growing international climate policy momentum leading toward the Paris Agreement later in 2015. Financial regulators began realizing that the transition toward a lower carbon economy could create significant market disruption, stranded assets, policy uncertainty, and technological transformation. Conclude by emphasizing that the FSB's decision in April 2015 laid the institutional foundation for the creation of the TCFD and fundamentally changed how financial systems would eventually approach climate-related disclosure and risk governance. Now we shall move to part 2 of TCFD in the upcoming week. We encourage you to remain actively engaged with our channel, participate in the forthcoming sessions, and thoughtfully disseminate these professional insights across your network, particularly among business leaders, sustainability practitioners, compliance professionals, and stakeholders committed to advancing responsible corporate governance and transparent reporting practices. The transition toward integrated sustainability reporting is no longer merely a regulatory expectation. It is a strategic imperative for building resilient, accountable, and future-ready enterprises. With sincere appreciation for your continued association, we look forward to welcoming you in the next session as we continue this important journey towards strengthened sustainability leadership and reporting excellence.